welcome again if you've been here since 10 a.m., in which case, congratulations. You will have seen many inspiring things, and what you're about to see, I hope, will be equally inspiring. This is a rather special edition of Siba Talks, Sibelius Academy's interview series, because it's taking place as part of this wider Sibafest program. My name is Keval Shah. I am lecturer of lead music here at Sibelius Academy, and I'm the founder and presenter of this series. This is the first edition of the second year of the series, and over the last 12 months, I've had the great pleasure to speak to some truly extraordinary creative people in Finnish and international music scenes. People like Susanna Malki, Sebastian Fagerlund, Emilia Sisko, Maja Kauhanen, and my guest today is no exception. This is going to be something very, very special, I am sure. As always with these interviews, there will be a bit of music interspersed, and today all of the musical excerpts are pieces of music written by my guest to give you a flavor of my guest's soundworlds. And as ever, at the end, you will have a chance to ask any of your own questions, so please do not be shy. I feel obliged to say that in Finland all the time because people always tell me that Finns are shy, so please don't be. Jimmy and I definitely aren't. My guest today is one of the leading compositional voices of his generation, a native of Lima, Peru, and a graduate of both the Sibelius Academy and the University of California, Berkeley. His music is now regularly performed by leading orchestras around the world, including the New York Philharmonic, the Orchestre de Paris, the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, the London Philharmonic Orchestra, etc., etc. And he currently holds the title of composer in residence with the Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal and the San Diego Symphony. His writing has received widespread critical acclaim, and several of his works are now firmly established as core contemporary orchestral repertoire. His music has been nominated for awards, including a Latin Grammy, and he was recently announced as Sibelius Academy's Alumnus of the Year, in recognition of his distinctive and inspiring contribution to the world of music. It is a great pleasure to have him back in Finland, so please give a warm welcome to Jimmy López. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Was this building here when you were studying?
Not when I was studying, for sure. It was in the planning stages, but I left in 2007, way before it was actually built. Yeah.
Well, welcome for the first time onto this platform then. We're sitting here in Helsinki on a beautifully snowy day to celebrate you as alumnus of this wonderful academy, but your story begins in a place without snow, most of the time. Talk to me about your musical environment growing up in Peru. What was the soundtrack of your childhood, and when did Western classical music start to become part of your world?
Well, I did not grow up in a musical family, in that my father was an architect, my mother a kindergarten teacher, and then my sister went on to study biology, so music was not really something that I got from my childhood or my upbringing. But of course, as anyone else, I was surrounded by music, but mostly I would say in music from, of course, folk music from Peru, could be Afro-Peruvian music or from the north, but also regular pop music from the 80s. You know, I was born in '78, and of course my sister was playing MTV, you know, and I didn't think much about it, but I did start playing piano at 5 by the insistence of, you know, my mother, but I actually wanted to do it. But what I was playing mostly were like popular songs and tangos, because her mother, my grandmother, used to play tangos on the piano. So that was there in the background. When I reached the age of 11, though, I came across an invention by Bach. And for some reason, it just was a great revelation. The only classical music I had been exposed to before would be through cartoons. I would say Tom and Jerry or the Looney Tunes, which actually fantastic. But I feel that classical music wasn't a part of my life until that moment when Bach just made its way. And after that, you know, I went on an incessant quest for understanding what was this kind of music, and that's when I really went more seriously into it, I would say.
What did that quest look like when you were 11 years old? Because I think for people nowadays, it's very easy to sort of get information from the internet and sit on YouTube and find your way quite quickly into what we might loosely call like the heart of the Western classical canon, but I imagine it wasn't that easy?
No, I would say that my two main sources were music scores and radio. So we actually have, and still have, decent classical music radio in Lima, and then the music scores are something that I was really trying to understand, because up until that point, I had been studying with a system of numbers. Not exactly the Suzuki method, but it relied very much on, on memory. So I wasn't able to read so well. And then when I actually wanted to decipher all these scores by Bach, of course I needed to learn how to read. So I taught myself how to read music. And that was an adventure. You know, it would take 30 minutes to decipher a single bar. And through that, that was my entryway into other composers. But I will say that I spent many, many hours at the piano. And I wasn't sure at that point whether I wanted to be a pianist or a composer. I found out actually later on that I wanted to be a composer.
I have the impression that spending many, many hours like this as a young musician on your own, in a way teaching yourself, probably, without you realizing, ends up building a certain kind of foundation for the life that follows, because there's a sort of rigor involved in slow, methodical, and sometimes unmethodical work as a curious young musician. Do you look back on your childhood and think that actually that was the study that you did at that point was very formative for you?
I think that the fact that I had to, I actually researched or studied music without understanding the foundations of music. Let's say I started to play these harmonies without understanding what they were. I started to intuitively understand the function of chords, let's say in tonal music, resolution, dissonance, consonance, without really knowing what their names were. And then getting very familiar with polyphony, especially in the Baroque, without really understanding that it was polyphony. So when I started to compose my first pieces, they kind of emulated those things. They kind of have all these modulations and chord progressions and polyphony all over the place, but it was in an unruly way, I will say. But discovering that by myself was fantastic, because when I would go to a lesson, later on, when they explained what counterpoint was and what harmony was, it was unlike the other students who were being exposed to this for the first time. I had already tried to understand that in my own means, and so it was, the knowledge came in a different way to me. I felt like, oh, this is it. Everything came as a revelation to me. Oh, this is what I was trying to understand, and I didn't. It was more of it complemented the work that I had been doing already.
Yeah, almost as if somebody was just simply putting into words something that you'd already thought about, which probably makes the experience much deeper, because it sounds like then your relationship to music and to musical sound is your own thing. There's some internal impulse or internal will to create or explore. It's great if somebody can theoretically explain to you and articulate for you what that actually means. And of course, having theoretical tools is a helpful way of then developing further. But I think it's very precious that your entry point isn't someone telling you, oh, well, this is a chord and this is an octave and this is a treble clef and now you're supposed to write something. You actually did you feel a desire to create from the beginning?
I will say that I found out when I was practicing the piano that I wasn't very fond of repeating the same passage over and over again. And the thing is, I started to modify the pieces to the point that, you're not supposed to do that. If you're performing the sonata by Mozart, you're not supposed to change it. But I felt compelled to sometimes, maybe what if I changed this little chord or if I added this note? And it was like, then I realized maybe I'm not more interested in shaping music rather than just repeating it, And of course, there's a beauty about perfecting the art of performance, but that's not what I was interested in.
I think it's very healthy that your early approach to working with music of established masters, a term I use very loosely, was to be open to the idea of changing what they've done. And I wonder if that comes from being at a geographic distance from the European musical centers, because from what I've experienced in the European musical centers, I would say when you are surrounded by the soil, it's very difficult to feel that you have the freedom to plant something new.
I think you're onto something, because I think I didn't grow up with the reverence towards that. For me, it was just music. And honestly, I was also simultaneously very interested in reading the biographies of composers. So even early on, when I was 11 or 12, I was reading the biographies of Liszt and Chopin and Mozart. And it was really interesting to see their beginnings. And so to me, the music I was reading was very human. It was alive. It was wet ink at some point. And then I actually deliberately started to do some exercises. I started to look at sonatas by different composers and then, let's say, play the first 2 pages and then try to guess how they would have continued the piece. So I would start to write, the next page of the sonata and then compare my own composition to what they actually did. And it was really revealing. It was fantastic because there were some composers that actually met my expectations. It kind of, this is exactly, it went where I thought it would go. There were others that kind of disappointed me, honestly.
You can name some names. I always say to my students, they're not here anymore, so it's fine.
Well, I mean, but then the great composers, the great masters, they always surprise me because I couldn't have thought of this. They were going into directions that I wouldn't have thought of, and that made the music exciting to me.
Yeah, I think that sense of playing with expectations and setting up an expectation in the ears of the person listening just in order to then be able to move in a different direction is such a hallmark of so much of great music in any genre. It's definitely, if I think about the music that you've written, it's also true of the way in which you write, that you set up patterns or you set up things which seems like to go in a certain direction, and then having established that, you're very happy to divert away.
Yeah, I have a very good friend, a librettist, Nilo Cruz, who articulates that in a very smart and concise way. You need to be ahead of the audience in that, you can't fall into this situation where your music or anything you write becomes predictable. And it's not that you must be obsessed with always having, something new and different, but it's a key to maintaining attention, to always steer your audience into places that they might not have expected to go. If the path is like really set from the beginning and you just follow through, then it becomes quite boring.
Well, there's no need for anyone to listen. If I already know how it ends, there's no point experiencing it, right? You have to kind of hold my attention. I think maybe this would be a good point to pause the conversation and listen to a bit of your music then and see if it takes us in directions that we're not expecting it to. We have Jimmy very kindly provided me with so many excerpts of his music, and sadly we don't have time for absolutely everything, although I can send you the list. And you are also free to sort of go on his website and find all of these excellent recordings and live performances. But given that we're in Finland and given that you have written music for Finnish musicians, I wonder if we could start with Warped Symmetry, which is a piece you wrote for Sami Junnonen. Can you tell us a bit about this solo flute piece?
Well, Sami and I go back to our days at the Academy. We're very good friends. We traveled together to Peru. He had played in our orchestral work I had written. And then, our relationship as friends developed, but also artistically we started to want to collaborate with each other. He has played my flute concerto a couple of times in Finland and the United States, and he commissioned this short flute piece, 7 minutes, and knowing Sami, and his virtuoso capabilities was really inspiring for this piece. So the title kind of refers to the way that phrases are built. It's kind of, because the one thing that you can deal with, or the main aspect that you deal with when you write for a solo instrument is melodic construction, how you construct your melodies. And talking about expectations, generally in the classical forms we talk about antecedents and consequences and the symmetry between them. So what I was trying to do is like, what if we actually change the weight of different phrases in that we have a very short introductory phrase and then the consequent is extremely long, or the opposite, how do we actually change those things, and how the gravitational pull of the melodies and phrases changes. So this is a bit of an experiment in that,
Let's have a listen. This is track 5. This is Warped Symmetry for solo flute, written in 2011. That was the opening of Warped Symmetry, your piece from 2011, and you can absolutely hear these sort of unexpectedly ending phrases and things that keep sort of... Dare I go back to your image earlier on of your experience with cartoon music, because there's something of the kind of the Tom and Jerry in all of that. So, Jimmy, after some conservatory training in Lima, you decided to come to Finland to study for a master's degree in composition. What made you want to come here? Why here and not somewhere else?
Well, the story I tell is the same always, but what makes it special is that one of the people responsible is here, actually. In fact, Ambassador Mikko Pyhälä was ambassador of Finland in Peru, and a good friend of ours, Jose Quesada, was a music critic at our largest newspaper, journal, El Comercio. And through his invitation, he came to Finland to just write about institutions, about music life, composers, and Jose came absolutely amazed at what he had seen in Finland. Of course, he wrote the article that he had to, but he also shared his experiences with us young composers. So I remember he actually asked a few of us to join him at home. He brought some of the CDs and scores that he had taken from Finland. And we were, of course, in awe of well, what is this land of music that I haven't heard of before? And at that point in time, it was an inflection in my life because I was actually planning on studying abroad already. I was at the conservatory, but I wanted to study abroad, and I was thinking perhaps England or the United States because I spoke English already. So Finland was really not on my list of possible destinations. But after those encounters with Jose and everything he had experienced, I felt that why not give it a try? Because what I had heard was very fascinating. The music from Rautavaara, Aulis Sallinen, Kalevi Aho, and especially the amount of symphonic, orchestral music coming from here, in relation also to the population, and the importance that music had in this society. All of those things were very appealing to me. And so that was basically the decision to come here.
You talk about the proliferation of particularly orchestral writing that's come out of Finland, and what perhaps we can both agree is a culture where contemporary musical voices are nurtured very strongly. When you first came here, how did you see your emerging compositional voice in relation to the kind of music that you were experiencing here?
Oh, well, honestly, I came here like a sponge, ready to absorb anything and everything I would listen to. So at that point, I was really concerned about what my style is, or what my personality in terms of music would be. I was more interested in just absorbing everything that this country had to offer. And I spent a lot of time in the library, a lot of time at concerts and music festivals, and of course, interacting with my colleagues. So for me, it was about the moment where I wanted to nurture, to just, and also experiment to write in different styles. So a lot of my early output is quite eclectic, I would say, because it actually goes into, Darmstadt style avant-garde, all the way to romanticism and everything in between. And so those years, I was actually just testing myself into experimenting all these different ways of writing and really putting myself deliberately in uncomfortable situations to see how I thrive or not. And only then, when I, reached my late 20s, I started to cleanse a little bit of my musical language.
Does that mean that at the time that you were sort of happy to experiment and put yourself, as you say, out of your comfort zone in different types of musical writing, that you weren't consciously looking for your artistic voice?
I think we all are, in a way. But I always tell young composers not to hurry the process. I, at some point, wanted to, because it felt like I need to. But honestly, you need to give yourself time. It's a process that happens at a different pace for each composer, and it cannot be forced. And you will know, when you're reaching a point where, oh, maybe these elements are something that don't belong to me or do not appeal to me in the same way that others do. And it's not easy to recognize those things when you're young, because you're bombarded with information, and also you are a little more vulnerable because you want kind of external approval. You are seeking for validation for the most part because you're unsure of whether your writing is good or not, and you must start to write in a certain school of thought, let's say, just to feel accepted, or you might feel that, oh, I need to write in this style because I will win a competition if I do, and then you start to realize that those things are not important. What's really important is trying to find what's essential. Who are you? In this process of know thyself, the old adage, of course it is important, but it isn't the hardest thing to do. And it takes a lot of discipline, but also it takes some bravery, just daring to do it.
Absolutely, but I think it's very pertinent what you say about before you start stripping away the things which are not belonging to you, first you have to try them, right? So sort of a process of building layers before you peel the onion away and find its core.
Exactly. How do you know what kind of food you like if you don't actually try it?
Right.
I think for me it was important to just be open to testing all these flavors and then finding out what I like.
But this was for you not an entirely, it's not for anyone a straightforward process, but is it fair to say that you were also confronting the question of distance from home in your artistic growth? That yes, you were in an environment that offered you lots of new food to try, literally and musically, but you were also becoming more aware as a result of the food that you had left behind.
Well, you touch upon a very important point, because when you're kind of extricated from your homeland into some place that feels very foreign in many ways, in positive and sometimes not positive ways, it actually starts to make you look inward as well. Like, who are you? Where I come from? And that happens at many levels, but also happens musically. And I was actually invited by some older composers when I would attend master classes to look back into my own heritage. And at first, I actually was a bit defensive. I was like, well, is it because I'm Peruvian and Peru doesn't have a large classical music tradition that I'm expected to sound Peruvian? And I was at first rejecting those things. But then I realized, well, maybe there is something in Peruvian music that can contribute to my musical language after all, and maybe contribute to building a unique voice. And but I just wanted it to happen in a way that didn't feel forced or didn't feel like tokenism, you know? Because even though I'm Peruvian, I am from Lima, and so taking, for example, Afro-Peruvian music or music from the Andes can feel like appropriation if not done in a conscious way.
Absolutely. Peruvian music is not a monolith. There are so many Peruvian musics. So where do you, how do you start looking for what part of the Peruvian musical cultures is something that you're going to be informed by or influenced by?
So the process here happened that I got a commission that really changed things for me. And the commission to write a new piece for the inauguration of the National Library of Peru. The then Minister of Education, Javier Sota Nadal, commissioned me this piece, and I decided, okay, well, we're talking about the National Library, so I should perhaps write a symphonic poem, so something based on literature. And I wrote something based on a poem called Blasón, which is a very well-known poem for all Peruvians. But this poet, José Santos Chocano, seems equally proud of his Spanish and Inca heritage, which is interesting to me because, we as Peruvians, we grow with a certain sense of resentment towards Spanish colonialism and the conquest because of all the damage that it did. But at the same time, we are a result of that fusion, So the interesting thing about José Santos Chocano is that he seems equally proud of both. And that was provocative in a way. Challenging. So I tackled that into the piece. But the first stanza of the piece opens with an untamed America, an America before the arrival of the Spaniards. And I was like, oh, well, I'm writing here an orchestra piece. All this is very European. How do I depict the world before the Spaniards arrive? And that's when, after a lot of thought, even though it might seem obvious now, I decided to use native Peruvian instruments. So I start with pututos, which are conch shells, and ocarinas, which are present in other parts of the world as well, and then little bird whistles that emulate the sound of birds. So the first few bars of this piece are just those sounds, and then the orchestra creeps in, kind of emulating those sounds as well, and then we go on to the rest of the piece.
And this was really the first time that you tried to do this, right? To integrate the various musical elements of who you are.
Yeah, and it felt justified. It felt artistically necessary, which was important to me. And I, because it was born out of the poem, out of what the piece was written for and what it was supposed to tell in terms of the story.
Right, born out of artistic necessity and curiosity rather than out of a sort of abstract moral or political or social. It might have political and social resonances, but your motivation was actually genuinely artistic.
Exactly.
Let's have a listen. This is a little portion from this 2006 work, América Salvaje. This is track 6 on our playlist. Cool. That was just a very tiny snippet of América Salvaje. But you can hear, I mean, just if we compare the two pieces that we've heard now, this solo flute piece and this, that your curiosity for different kinds of musical sound worlds is, let's call it a hallmark of your artistic voice, that you're not hemmed in or bound by any one type of musical language. You're looking for something else.
I think each piece is its own world, so you need to write accordingly, whatever you want to express in that particular work. So we are in this time, and we live at a time where we have a large perspective of music history, and I always felt like we should not deprive ourselves from that wealth of music that has come before us. So that's why I don't feel compelled to reject a certain kind of musical style and stick to a certain musical style. I think really I just want to, this is a vast wealth of sounds, why not incorporate them when you need them?
Can I ask if that sense of open-mindedness musically and a willingness to explore so many different sounds is something which you felt particularly was encouraged during your time in Finland? I asked that because when I interviewed Kaija Saariaho a few years ago, she articulates something very similar to what you've just said, that every piece is an opportunity to explore something new, to find something new, and her influences covered everything from Monteverdi to French 19th century music to, of course, her contemporaries in the latter decades of the 20th century. I mean, there was just so many different types of sound world informing what she was doing, and it just strikes me that, is this something that you associate with your time in Finland, this open-mindedness?
I would say that yes, to a certain extent, because they were very formative years, you know, and what I was encouraged by my teachers also to look into different kind of styles. Now, I first studied with Matti Puumala, and then I started with Eero Hämeenniemi, two very different kind of composers. Veli-Matti was more grounded on the 20th, 21st century kind of tradition. Well, we had just started the 21st century. So, and he gave me all the discipline, the rigor that I needed to really prepare my materials and organize sounds. And then when I transitioned to Eero already had a very strong connection to India and Indian classical music. So he had already, his mindset was very different. So I felt it very enlightening to have these two different approaches to music and combining them in a way. So I was definitely inspired by that, but also by all the music that I was listening at the time. I feel that we were at a very interesting moment in time where I heard a lot of composers that were trying to incorporate elements also from, let's say, there was a tendency for crossover that I wasn't a big fan of, I have to say. But it was interesting to see that there was a desire to, go across genres. And so when seeing that, of course, it, felt relevant to me as someone who was in Finland from a very distant land.
Did you feel a sense of distance on a personal level during your time here?
Oh yeah, I mean, I did and I did not. In a sense, it gave me the feeling that, a deeper understanding of who we are, because we tend to think of ourselves as very different from each other. But you also start to look at what's common between us, as humans in a way. So yeah, on the surface there are many things that separate us and divide us, but honestly, I'm the kind of person that believes that there are more things that actually connect us.
And yet, in 2007, you did make the decision to leave Finland after 7 happy years, and you decided to move to America, where you pursued further study and then began to build your career. I'm thinking about young composers who graduate from a school like this and then have to go and build a career or have to see what happens to their career. Can you take me back to those early professional years? What was your feeling at the time about your path, and how closely does what you've gone on to do reflect what your aspirations or ambitions were then?
I think at that point, after having imbibed with European classical tradition, both in Finland and in Europe, because I have been traveling around to master classes and all that, after that time I felt a need for something else. It's just my curiosity taking me to California in particular was interesting to me, I have to say, because even though my music sounds nothing like those composers, but composers like Harry Parch or Terry Riley or Henry Cowell always struck me for their originality. And I felt, this is a land where people actually are very free to experiment. And it's so distant from the Central European centers. And I felt maybe I should experience that as well and see what it does to me. Maybe I will experience something different. And I did. I felt that going to California gave me again that sense of detachment. I was again in a very different place, both from Peru and Finland. So it was again a process of adapting to a completely different culture, etc. But it also was a chance for me to feel free. I felt much more freedom to just continue experimenting and just be more honest with myself. There were some things that while I was here, I was cautious about approaching. Like, for example, an overt tonal language was something that I was not very fond of here or afraid of exploring Whereas in California, I don't think anybody cared. And when I arrived there, I also saw that the music department at UC Berkeley was very varied stylistically. You know, there was one composer who actually, his main source of inspiration was his own Filipino background, so excellent vocal music and Filipino traditions. Another composer was more into the French avant-garde. Then another one was into reggae, in fact. Reggae was his main source of inspiration. I was like, what is this place that allows all these different voices? I felt like, wow, that was exciting also.
And what did you feel like you brought to the table? I mean, I'm sure they're all talking about, oh, there was this guy, Jimmy López, and he brought all of these things which were new to them. So are you aware of the things that you brought with you to California that was fresh for their ears?
Well, at that point, I was not only Peruvian, I will say. At that point, I had been already absorbing everything that came from Finland. So it was a bit of a mix of both. I was bringing both the traditions, music from Peru, because by then I had incorporated some of that already. But of course, also my knowledge about Nordic music and, you know, Nordic landscapes and everything that it comes with it. And I would say that also my orchestral writing, because not everybody there had the chance to write for orchestra as much as I did, and I feel that Finland was responsible for that as well, because one luxury that this academy has is this kapubändi, which is the orchestra where conductors practice with every week. That doesn't happen everywhere in the world, and I, as a composer, was able to actually submit some of my pieces to the conductors so that they could rehearse them. And, you know, I did that 3 or 4 times. That's an incredible learning experience for a young composer.
Yeah, it is extraordinary, actually, now that you mention it, just how broad your orchestral writing is already, sort of, say, by 2010, 2011. You've already written substantial pieces for full orchestra, and then that goes on to become your, is it fair to call orchestral writing your primary musical voice?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, of course, you have written chamber music and opera, and piano concertos, etc., but it seems to be that the world of the symphony, your 6th is on its way, for example. You know, there aren't many contemporary composers who can say that they're on to their 6th symphony. It does mean you only have 3 left. But,
I hope not, for sure.
But I'm just curious about the practicalities of being a composer then who writes predominantly for full orchestra, because certainly as a young composer or an emerging composer, as you said rightly, you don't have so many opportunities necessarily to get these pieces played. And if they're not played, I guess you also don't necessarily get to learn how orchestral texture works really in sound.
Yeah, my first composition teacher in Peru, Enrique Iturriaga, which was basically the dean of all composers there, he said that composition is a craft. And I couldn't agree more, because it's not a science. It's also not something that you cannot go through the instrumentation orchestration books, read all of them and say, okay, now I know how to orchestrate. You really have to just try. It's trial and error, and it's more like pottery, to be honest with you. It's like you try, and then your first experiments are a bit of a disaster, but then your hands become a little more steady, and the shapes start to come more clearly, and your connection between what you intend to write, the result, it starts to become more clear. You start to streamline more clearly things. Because honestly, we start in a very abstract place. It can start with shapes even, not necessarily even sounds. So then it goes and it starts to materialize little by little into pitches and rhythms and all that. But then you have the task of making that possible physically, so that it actually is playable by instruments that have technical limitations. And of course, the beauty of the orchestra is that they all have limitations, but combined, they have also enormous possibilities. So that's why the orchestra attracted me, because you can always find a way to depict a color with a combination of instruments that you might not have thought of before.
Yeah, interesting. Let's dive in a bit more into this idea of starting with abstract ideas, because I'm interested in what sparks an idea for you. Because if I look at your catalogue of works, I see, yes, of course, that there is this deep engagement, sustained engagement with Peruvian musical cultures, but that's not the only thing that's informing your work. I mean, this upcoming 6th symphony, the Monarch Symphony, has got completely different sort of imaginary world at its core, or you've written pieces on queer liberation, you've written opera about political terrorism. There seems to be a lot of, let's say, abstract and also non-abstract things which are sparking something in your mind. And I just would love it if you were able to, if you could slow down that process for us and talk to us about what actually happens between experiencing something or thinking something and crafting it into sound.
Well, we were talking about this. Each piece is its own world, so you need to understand what the origin is, what the final function, if any, of the piece is, and what you want to achieve with that piece. Also, if you as a composer decide that you want to use our platform to talk about issues that might be relevant to our time, and sometimes I've been given that opportunity, like the oratorio Dreamers, for example, that I wrote, was written during the first Trump administration, and it talks about dreamers who are undocumented immigrants that came as children to the United States with their parents. So of course they had no choice in the matter. Then they are trapped in this legal limbo where they don't know any other country, and they have grown in the United States. They are integral part of the society, but they have no documentation. They're invisible. So that is an issue that I wanted to confront, and it is, of course, a work that has text, so it's very clearly, but I don't want to say it is political, because what I wanted to say always is I want to create empathy. I want people to look at the human side of things. I think the political aspect is covered by many already. That's not what I want to do. I want for people to understand that behind those stories there are human beings like us, families that are being torn, people whose lives are being appended. So that was what I wanted to deal with. And when it comes to, for example, the International Pride Orchestra commissioned me a piece for the inaugural concert in San Francisco in 2022. And no one had ever commissioned me a piece that touched upon gay pride. And I felt, well, that's very relevant because we are in San Francisco, one of the most liberal cities in the world, and also it's the place where I've lived for so long. And I felt this is a great opportunity to talk about this issue. Even though it's a purely abstract piece, I named it Loud, and Loud referring, to people being, in gay culture, it can refer to the way you dress, the way you behave, but also I wanted to bring the aspect of protests, because we want to remember that Pride at first was a protest, and it ended up in riots. So we should not forget that at some point it was banned, and so we had to fight our way into becoming respected or parts of the society. And that dedicated to my husband as well, so it's very personal in so many ways. So I feel that if you're given a platform, and again, if it comes out of necessity, then I feel that, yeah, I'm ready to tackle those issues.
It's an interesting one because, of course, when you're an emerging composer or a young composer, these kinds of invitations aren't necessarily coming to you. So when you're established and invitations are coming, you have quite concrete material to work with. You get a commission from a gay orchestra, or you get a commission from whoever it is, to say, we want something on this theme. But when you are finding your own voice or building your career, you are, I guess, having to come up with the goods yourself and then try and get attention for those pieces. So can you talk to me a little bit about when you realized that for you as a composer, engaging with the world around you in this way was going to be something important? Because I don't believe it's the case that out of nowhere these kinds of commissions are coming your way. They must come to you because you demonstrate that you want to work in this way as an artist. How did you come to this understanding? Because not every artist does, and that's also valid, but it's at the heart of your artistic philosophy.
I think what I've always tried is not to be put in a box. I think that has been the greatest challenge, because as a Latino in the United States, it's very easy to be boxed into, oh, he's from South America, so he sounds a certain way. And it didn't help that my most famous piece is called Fiesta, honestly.
You didn't help yourself.
And I was not expecting for it to become the most popular piece, but it ended up being the most played piece. And so here I am with that being the introductory piece to Jimmy López and many orchestras, including the Chicago Symphony, Melbourne, Sydney. And I'm like, well, now the expectation is that I'm going to write Siesta number 2. Sorry, Fiesta, not Siesta.
That's coming.
But yeah, that's coming. But what I did deliberately was like to kind of tell them, trust me, you know. Trust me, I don't want to repeat myself in that sense. It wasn't interesting for me to continue exploring that. That was a one-off experiment that I wanted to try. Like I have one piece inspired by jazz called Avec Swing. And that was my own experiment, only experiment with jazz. So far, I haven't been interested in going back to that. So what I tell people is that you will find my voice. At the core, it is Jimmy López, but it might be about something completely different. So that's why I like to write art music, concert music, because unlike commercial music, for example, you're expected to deliver a product that meets a certain expectation. But when you are a composer, like in the classical music field, they want to commission you because they like your music. They trust you, your voice. And so I tell them, trust me, and I'll take you on a journey. And sometimes the commissioner comes with more concrete proposals, like I want this piece to be based on this or that. And then if it's something that doesn't interest me, I either don't take the commission or try to actually convince them into going in a different direction that excites me, because as an artist, I need to be really excited about the project, otherwise it won't come out well. I need to be personally engaged by whatever theme we're going to tackle. So if there's, for example, this Monarch Symphony you were talking about, that's a commission that's upcoming. I mean, the piece is written, but the premiere is going to be in 27, and it's by the Montreal Symphony and San Diego Symphony. And it was Rafael Pallares' idea, who's the principal director, to tackle the theme of immigration. Now, I was thinking about how to tackle immigration not in a confrontational way like I had done with Dreamers, and also I didn't have text. So I found a more poetic way of dealing with that. And that's when I looked into the patterns of migration of monarch butterflies, which span through Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and are a beautiful metaphor for immigration, because it happens not in a single generation, but in 3 generations. So I found, okay, monarch butterflies will be my entryway into building a metaphor, a symphony about immigration that is about this natural phenomena of these beautiful beings, fragile beings that undertake this enormous journey across man-made borders, because for them they don't exist. So I think there are so many layers of interpretation, and that excited me. So Rafael only told me write a piece about immigration, and then I came with ways to make it interesting to me and to connect it with the things that I wanted to talk about.
And these are 2 orchestras, as I said earlier, with whom you are a resident composer. So does that also give you greater scope to avoid being boxed in any one way? Because over the course of 1 or 2 seasons, do you feel you have the opportunity to showcase a broader range of your compositional voices?
Absolutely. I mean, residencies are the best, because I feel that for the most part, usually you're a guest composer and the orchestra plays your piece. There's a single week of rehearsals, the performance, and you're out. With a residency, the audience is exposed to your music over and over again, and to different works. So with each orchestra, I'm having 4 different orchestral works presented throughout 2 seasons, and chamber music concerts. Plus, I interact with students, I do pre-concert talks, and I do conversations like the ones we're doing now. So it's really an opportunity for people to know me at a personal level, but also to know my output throughout the years.
And so, what's coming up ahead for you? If we talk about you wanting to try new things and finding new challenges in every piece you write and discovering different strands to your musical voice, I'm going to guess that you're still happy writing music for a while to come. Do you have a sense of the kinds of areas you are keen to explore?
Yeah, and I was talking about this yesterday during the masterclass. It's like, as a composer, you also have to make some deliberate choices about how you want to shape your catalog. And I have a vision of we're writing at least 10 symphonies, 10, and then writing probably I would love to write 5 operas. I've only written 1, But I have this, aspiration to do that, and I want to write much more chamber music, like music for the piano, for example. Now, expectations meet reality and practicalities. Chamber music doesn't pay as well as orchestral music, and I'm a freelance composer, so hard decisions have to be made at some point. But luckily enough, the last 2 projects that I'm involved now are chamber music projects. So it's a wind quintet for Ilmio ensemble that is going to be premiered in Finland in April. And then I'm writing now a violin piano piece for a Canadian violinist called Blake Pullio. So that is my chance to really, and that was a deliberate decision. It's like I've been writing so much orchestral music. I talked to my agent and I said, we need to pause and create space for chamber music. So that's what I'm doing now. After this, I'll go back to the orchestral world. Hopefully, I'll be able to complete my 4th symphony, because I completed my 6th, but my 4th is unfinished. Now you know how composers end up with unfinished symphonies. So I actually have written movement number 1 of my symphony number 4, but 2 and 3 are still missing because we need to find commissioners for both. So what I'm hoping is after I complete this violin piano piece, I go back to my 4th symphony. And that's, there are some ideas about a ballet in the future, but there's so many projects that you have, and then many of them don't materialize, but at least you always have to have something in the pipeline.
We're almost out of time, which is a shame, because I had this feeling, as you and I said the other week, that we probably could talk for hours. But before we finish, we will listen a little bit to Fiesta, because I think it's a good way to end. But before we listen to that, I wonder if you could just reflect for a moment on where you are now in your professional and personal life, and where you were when you came to Finland in 2000. And what, if anything, of Finland do you carry with you in your life today?
Oh my goodness, I carry a lot, for sure. I mean, first of all, my sister, who's present, lives here with her husband, Olli, and I speak Finnish. I still read novels in Finnish because I don't want to lose the language that I spent so many hours trying to learn. Of course, the music, I just recently wrote a piece called Aino, based on the Kalevala for Klaus Mäkelä. So Finland is a part of my life. It's part of who I am already. It's inevitable, But I feel that for me it's so special to be back now, 25 years after being admitted to the Sibelius Academy. And had you told me then that I was going to be alumnus of the year, that would have sounded very surreal to me, because I was just very happy that I was admitted to the Academy. Yeah, very hard. Already very hard to get in, so just this honor means so much to me. It brings things full circle. I was yesterday giving a master class, which felt also very interesting, that now I'm not the young composer anymore, I'm the established composer, giving the master class to these youngsters. And present was my former professor, Veli-Matti Puumala. So everything feels like full circle, I have to say. I'm very grateful for everything the country has given me, and this recognition it just means the world to me, really.
Well, I hope this country is also very grateful for everything you've given it. And on that note, let's listen to a little bit of the final movement of your 2007 work, Fiesta. This is called Techno, and with this, we are very, very happy to have Jimmy López back in Helsinki. So thank you very much for being here, Jimmy.
Thank you.
This is track 1. This is the one. It's not surprising that that's become one of your most popular pieces. Over 130 performances of this.
Indeed.
Yeah. I think we have a bit of time for any of your questions. So if there's something you'd like to ask, please feel free. And I think there's a microphone coming around. There's one over here.
Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation about music and helping us truly to understand the genius of Jimmy López. First, I want to congratulate you, Jimmy, with Rafael Payari for doing a great conservation action in writing a musical piece about the monarch butterfly, which is endangered. So you please invite all the world's environmental movements to contribute to the success of that composition next year. And about the ancient Peruvian music part, I'd like to ask you, or tell us, if you were inspired by the 5,000-year-old flute ensemble discovered by the archaeologist Ruth Shadi in Caral. As far as I know, at least when I was still in Peru, there was only one public performance with those flutes. Were you able to touch them or play, or could you use them, or did they inspire you?
Unfortunately, no, but I am aware of them for sure. And in my next trip, I'll make sure to actually wake up my contacts and see if I can get through them. They're such an incredible archaeological find, and also they are a hint into tuning systems that we're unaware of. You know, many different what today will be considered microtonal inflections, you know, and scales that are very unfamiliar. Unfortunately, the music was not notated, so we don't know how it sounded. But at least by knowing the instruments, we can have an idea of what kind of sound world they will be able to produce. So that's a fantastic initiative, in fact.
And because they are 5,000 years old, it's considered maybe the most ancient ensemble of musical instruments in the world, maybe. And they were used, once I heard Manuel Miranda played at the ruins of the National Theatre in Lima when they were performing King Lear. That's the only live performance with those flutes that I'm aware of. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Thank you.
Anybody else? I just tell you, it's shy. Well, if that, oh yes, we have one.
Thank you. So yesterday when you had your masterclass, what was your main message to the students at the Sibelius Academy?
Well, we actually, at first we concentrated on each individual composition and we gave like technical advice. But yes, at the very end, Veli-Matti and I agreed, we actually have to wrap it up with something that people don't learn in the classroom, and is how to make a career. What happens after academia? And they were very eager in understanding if there's a formula. Of course, there isn't. Each one of us is very different. But I was trying to give them a little bit of advice on what steps need to be taken for your music to be noticed, to be recorded, to be performed, creating bonds with performers around their age, because we sometimes aim at, oh, I want a great conductor here and there, and we go with our score and present it to them, and then they put it next to the pile of another 100 pieces that they don't have time to look at. But if you build connections with your contemporaries, they are going to become the masters of the future. And I think we overlook that aspect a lot. So I think creating very strong musical bonds is one of the main elements. The other important element, I said, the other pillar to building a successful career is writing music, the best possible music that we can, meaning that quality has to remain very high. We cannot compromise on quality. Sometimes we are rushed by deadlines, and a lot of students have many things to do, and they present unfinished products. And I tell them, you know, really work on producing the best version of the piece that you can at that specific moment in time. Maybe in the future you'll look at it and you say, that piece has so many shortcomings, but you need to make sure that at that point in time, that's the best you could do. That's the only way to ensure that music will be played in the future. We want to, you know, the reason why the classics are played is because there's something always that we can discover from listening over and over to them. And I feel that it's our task. We owe it to ourselves as composers and to everyone else to produce music that will be played in the future. Also, it's important for your royalties. If you want to receive royalties later in life, you have to make sure that people want to play your music, and they will only want to do that if the music is good, honestly.
Well, if there are no other questions, I think that's a very good message to leave this on. So, Jimmy López, thank you very much for coming all the way to Helsinki to join us, not only for today, but for your whole visit in the Sibelius Academy, and best of luck with everything. And we are excited for your next visit here already.
Thank you, Keval. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.